Tenthly, if then these impositions be so wicked, and for such wicked ends and causes, then in order to my being free of this heinous guilt, there is a necessity of my giving a testimony, and such an one which when brought to the touchstone will get God's approbation, and be my acquittance from a concurrence. Now, it is not imaginable that my testimony can be the exact obedience to the law, against the wickedness whereof it is witnessed, but on the contrary, it must be at least a plain and positive refusing to yield obedience to that law, when I am in no other case to counteract these commands. For I must either obey and be guilty, or refuse and be innocent. I shall not here plunge into the labyrinth of these debates and difficulties wherewith this matter of testimonies hath been perplexed, and mostly by those who have had no great mind to the thing. I shall only propound these few queries. Number 1. Whether anything less than a testimony can free me of this guilt whereby the nation involved in is made a curse. Number 2. Whether we believe that the testimony of everyone shall be called for in the day when God shall seek out this wickedness. Number 3. Whether, if ever it be necessary, it be not then when Christ is openly opposed, and everyone is called either to concur or to testify. 4th. Whether a testimony against a wicked law must not be noter, for my testimony must make it evident that the law is not obeyed by me, else it is no testimony. 5thly. Whether it be not necessary also that it be with that plainness and boldness, as it may keep some proportion with the prodigiousness of that wickedness testified against. 6th, whether, to the making it a testimony indeed, it is not only required that an opposition be made at first, but that this be so persisted in, as by no subsequent deed it be weakened. 7th, whether we do not take it for granted that according as a man hath testified, the sentence of the righteous judge shall pass. For he who hath not purged himself thereby from the guilt of this conspiracy shall be led forth and punished with these wicked workers of iniquity. It is a saying which should sink in the soul of every one who would be saved, especially in such a day. Whosoever therefore shall confess me before men, him will I confess also before my Father which is in heaven. But whosoever shall deny me before men, him will I also deny. Oh, that men would now judge of things and courses, as in that hour they desired to be judged. And then there would be little difficulty what to determine in that case. 11th. From what is said, it appears that there is no other way of testifying against it, or shunning the sin of this wickedness, imposing and enjoining these compliances, but by refusing them, which, as it is clear duty, so it hath many advantages to countervail all that supposed loss that can be sustained thereby. It is a shameful subterfuge to say, I strengthen them more by doing thus, which will make them take all, and so put themselves in better case to do the mischief decreed. For as it is then my suffering, not my sin, so it is simply false that I do hereby strengthen their hands. For hereby I do more certainly weaken their hands, and wound their cause by my counteracting, testifying, and suffering. For first, I do really, to the uttermost of the sphere of my activity, counteract their design, and hence, besides my own upmaking peace of conscience, which is my hundredfold in this life, I glorify God in the day of visitation, behaving as the subject and soldier of the Prince Michael. And, though I lose my life in the conflict, yet the victory over the dragon and his lieutenant and trustees and their lictors is thereby gained, and they are foiled, while I fight and overcome, by my not loving my life in the present case unto the death. Secondly, I do by my example encourage my brethren to stand fast and withstand in this day of evil. In this evil day. Thirdly, I hereby transmit to posterity a pattern for imitation, and so propagate an opposition to this course to succeeding generations. Fourthly, I hereby, so to speak, engage God to arise and appear to plead his own cause and his people's. For when we, out of love to him and zeal for his interests, take our lives in our hands, or expose our substance as a prey in witnessing for him, then he is engaged to own us and to plead his cause, taking the quarrel then to be against himself. Hence it is that when we put on the garments of vengeance for clothing, and goes forth to meet them, who in their risings up against his people run upon the bosses of his buckler, his arm is said to bring salvation to himself. Isaiah 59, verses 16 and 17, and Isaiah 63, verse 5. This keeps a man in case to pray against such a party, whereas a compliance with them in the least degree would wound a man's faith and weaken his confidence, so that he cannot wrestle with God to prevail. For that wherein his strength lay, a good conscience being sinned away, in vain doth he essay, when he hath cut his own hair, to shake himself as at other times. Alas, if by keeping a due distance from his enemies, we were in case to play the Samsons or Jacobs on our knees, this enemy, who think it their stability to stand upon the ruins of Christ's interest, should not stand long upon their feet. He who would have his prayer heard, Thy kingdom come, should make his practice in a conformity thereto, speak this plain language, If I perish, but comply I will not. For it is not necessary that I live or have an estate, but it is necessary I should witness a good confession against the wrongs done to Christ. Sixthly, this keeps a man in case either to act for God with advantage, if an opportunity be put in his hand, or to suffer as under his supportings and the shinings of his face, whereby even while dying he becomes an ornament to his profession, gives a dash to the enemy, and so becomes more than a conqueror. Twelfthly, let us consider the matter of scandal in the present case, and remember whose words these are, quote, Woe to the world because of the offenses, and woe to him by whom offenses come, unquote. And it will appear the payer of these exactions becomes highly guilty before God. Number one, in stumbling and hardening this party of enemies, for though there was never a party before them in the nation, and I much doubt if ever a party can come after them to outdo them, who had so many evidences of plagues poured upon their hearts, that he may pour forth his wrath and cause his fury to rest upon them, and that in his spotless justice he will rain snares upon them, and thereafter he may rain fire and brimstone, and horrid tempest, as the portion of their cup, when he shall come to plead his own cause. Yet we would beware lest we do anything that may embolden them, or make them bless themselves in this their stated opposition to Christ's. And because we know not but some of the elect may, for a time, be carried down with the current of this impetuous opposition to him, and may concur actively for a season in removing this course, we ought, even upon this supposition, so to witness, and so to keep a distance from all apparent or interpretive compliance with what they contrive and carry on, as they may, by beholding our steadfastness, be provoked to consider their own course, that considering at last how their feet go down to death, and their steps take hold to hell, how their steps take hold on hell, they may hasten their escape from the company of his enemies, lest they be consumed with the fire of his indignation, if found congregate with the men of these God-provoking practices. Secondly, by paying what is required, I stumble also and offend my weak brethren, while by my example they are encouraged to rush into the same compliance. Oh, let every man whose practice may be pleaded as a pattern remember that word, and who spoke it, quote, It were better that a millstone were hanged about his neck, and he were cast into the midst of the sea, than offend any of these little ones, unquote. Number 3. Sufferers for refusing this payment are offended when the payer doth not only encourage the persecutors to proceed with rigor and rage against him as a peevish and froward malcontent, but does what in him lies to wound to the heart and weaken the hands of such a faithful witness. Whereas if the poor sufferer saw himself, by a joint testimony owned by his brethren, he would be comforted, strengthened, and become more confident in the conflict. Number 4, in paying these things, the compliers either by their example lay a snare for the posterity, to whose knowledge their carriage may come, and so instead of leaving them a pattern of contending earnestly for the faith, they spread a net for their feet, yea, pave them a way of defection and apostasy. Or else they engage the great God out of zeal for his own glory, and tenderness of his people who shall succeed, for preventing of their following of such progenitors, wherein they have not been followers of him fully, to give such a testimony against their untenderness, and set such marks of displeasure upon their course, that the thoughts of turning aside with them and following their steps shall be terrible to all that hear of it. Lest for such a compliance they fall as they did, for all falling from their own steadfastness into the hands of the living God. But alas, for the posterity under whose curse we are like to go off the stage, because of our not having done what we ought, yea, what we might, both for transmitting pure ordinances unto them, and for not transcribing in our practice the noble example of our zealous and heroic ancestors, who valiantly resisted when violently attacked, and by their valor wrestled us into a state of liberty. Well, if we leave those that shall succeed us such an example as this, he is like to make us such an example as will fright the following generations, and will force them to serve themselves heirs to them who have gone before us, who did acquit themselves as the good soldiers of Jesus Christ, and not to us, the debt of whose declensions and defections cannot be paid without the destruction of those who shall serve themselves heirs to us. But alas, who does think on what he owes to the poor posterity? Or who doth make conscience to preserve for them that precious treasure put in our custody, and judges it more necessary than to leave the tract of a way contending zealously for God, and the preservation of his interests, and the propagation of his own pure ordinances to the posterity, shining so clearly by the suffering and blood as the wayfaring man, and they who shall come after, though fools, need not err therein. Our only comfort is, that the Lord, who shall see his seed, and must prolong his days, will make his pleasure prosper, and preserve some to be witnesses of it to his praise. That is the end of A Hind Let Loose.